The Untold Adventures of Biao. Season 1. Episode 15. It was a beautiful morning. As waking up, Biao felt pleased because he did not have such a good sleep for so long. After handling that body, the father and son went home to take a rest. Recently, many things happened in the village, so they did not sleep at all. But when Biao woke up, he discovered that his father woke up already for a long time. "Dad, why do you wake up so early? How can I be like you? Being followed, but you can sleep so well without any worrying." It turned out that since returning from the riverbank, they were followed until that moment. This made Mr. Gong doubted and unable to sleep well. Biao asked his father if that person left yet, who could keep an eye on their house all day long. Mr. Gong pointed out the window and said that person was still hanging out there. The fence of Mr. Gong was a type of old house wall, not very high. So just by looking out, it could be seen someone walking outside. Biao couldn't help but go out to see who it was. Mr. Gong saw that and also stood up to follow, did not stop him. "I really want to see who the sneaky guy is." Everyone knew that devil did not go out in the morning, so it must be a normal person. Although Mr. Gong told him to be careful, Biao didn't hesitate to push the door open. Don't understand what kind of person was doing nothing but just stand outside and refuse to come in and meet. "Who is that? What do you do out there?" Biao opened the door and shouted out loud. Unexpectedly, the mystery person stood right in front of the door, just opened it, then they're face to face. At this time, the distance between the two faces was only 10 inches apart. As soon as Biao saw that person's face, he broke out in a sweat and froze in shock. Whoever said this was a person, it was clearly a yaksha demon. Biao panicked, jumped back, and shouted to his father that there was a demon. Mr. Gong seemed to already know what happened. That female yaksha was also bewildered at this time. She quickly covered the scary half of her face with the hair. She turned towards Mr. Gong, bowed respectfully. Mr. Gong told Biao not to be so surprised. The girl bowed and apologized. At this time, Biao discovered that the woman in front of him had a strange face. She covered the scary half of her face with hair while the other half looked quite delicate. Did not know what terrible thing happened that made half of her face became like that. Mr. Gong asked the reason. The woman sobbed and said that it was really over, so she came here to seek help. Biao froze, not knowing what had happened. The crying woman looked pitiful and begged for help. She said it was all her fault in the past. Mr. Gong had lowered his head and didn't speak anything, making Biao also confused. But he knew his father's characteristic, so he did not dare to speak up. The woman just stood there and continued to cry, begging Mr. Gong for helps. Her family was in a very desperate state right now. Mr. Gong heard that and went into the house. Biao wondered why his father had such an attitude. But Biao still kept silent and following his father. Before entering the house, Mr. Gong didn't even turn around but let out a single sentence. "I already know what you want to ask me. I will try. It's not for you, it's for the sake of your dad. You just go back home." After Mr. Gong said that, he even didn't look back and went straight inside. After listening to Mr. Gong, the woman was silent for a moment, then burst into tears and thanked him. Apparently, she knew she was at fault, so she stood outside all day and didn't dare knock on the door. Biao closed the door. His curiosity couldn't hold it anymore. The woman was gone, so he hurriedly asked his father who she was and what happened. Mr. Gong was deep in thinking for a while, recalled the story of 10 years ago. He raised his head and sighed, then began to tell the story. 19 years ago, Mr. Gong brought little Biao to this Da Ping village without any relatives. At that time, Mr. Gong was also seriously injured. Fortunately, there was an old man of Chu's family who saved and treated him, so he could get through those days. Mr. Gong was very grateful for his saving lives, so they became good friends. At that time, Mr. Chu's father passed away. Mr. Gong wanted to repay the favor, so he tried to find a grave nearby with the best feng shui for the owner to bury Mr. Chu's father. Indeed, Mr. Gong was a newcomer. Even if he said that he was just helping others without other purposes, it would not be believed easily. But Mr. Chu trusted him very much. "Big brother, trust me, this grave will help your next generation to be rich and healthy." "Of course I believe you. I know you're not an ordinary person. But something must have happened to make you come to this small village. You overestimate me already." Because Mr. Chu's family also practiced medicine, so he knew a lot. Moreover, after getting to know for a while, he understood Mr. Gong was a talented person. Just like that, he listened to Mr. Gong buried his father in the south of the remote northern mountains. Indeed, after listening to Mr. Gong buried his father there, Mr. Chu's family was very lucky and constantly developed, soon building a big house. His family was the first one in the village that can build a big house like that. Just like that, a few years passed, and Mr. Chu's health declined. He invited Mr. Gong to come. He looked forward to Mr. Gong helped him with one last thing. "Mr. Gong, I can't make it over. My burial is entirely up to you. I don't ask for wealth. I just pray that my family and grandchildren will be safe and peaceful in the future." Mr. Gong raised his hand and foresaw Mr. Chu's destiny. Indeed, Mr. Chu's life came to an end. There was no other way. Mr. Gong could only accommodate his request and did not want to say any fake consolation. Mr. Chu also gently smiled and thanked his old friend. "Okay. Still, the same saying. If you trust me, I will do my best." "Of course I trust you, it's been many years since we knew each other." It was at this moment that the doors suddenly opened. It turned out to be the uncle of Mr. Chu's daughter-in-law. It was strange that he came to visit him. Mr. Gong saw that and stood aside. The daughter spoke up and introduced her uncle as a famous feng shui master in the city, coming here to visit Mr. Chu. She also said that the grave would be left to her uncle to take care of. After hearing the daughter-in-law exaggerate about her uncle, Mr. Gong knew what her real purpose was. "What are you talking about? Just looking at your father-in-law, I know he would live for 100 years long. He will pass this time too." From his gestures to his words, Mr. Gong knew right away that this was just an expert on scammers. But Mr. Gong himself was just a stranger and did not understand the inside of the Chu family, so he did not say anything. Regarding Mr. Chu himself, he was a master of medicine. He was very clear about his health. He understood that this person was saying comfort, so he just said thank you. And then that day came. Illnesses couldn't be overcome with a few comforting words. Life couldn't be reversed by a few sentences. A few days later, Mr. Chu passed away. In the past, Mr. Chu treated everyone in the village very well. This time he passed away, everyone came to visit. But Mr. Gong did not go, he went alone to the northern mountains.